Putin has made it clear time and time again, Russia wants the Donbas. It wants the region so badly that it's still at the heart of every Russian demand made during peace talks. But Russia will never take the Donbas. Why? The sacrifice that Russia would have to make would send shockwaves throughout the entire country, and we can see that when we look at the absolutely insane numbers. Never mind taking Ukraine, Putin is terrified of what taking the Donbas means for Russia, and we're going to explain why. Let's sum it up before we jump into the numbers. 18 months and practically all of its troops. That's what it would cost Russia to take the Donbas, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and the deputy head of Ukraine's presidential office, Pavlo Palisa. We'll start with Palisa's comments. On March 1st, Palisa spoke to Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, where he said that the pace of the Russian advance in Ukraine is still immensely slow. At the same time, this slow advance is costing Russia a phenomenal number of soldiers in the Donetsk Oblast, which is the portion of the Donbas that Russia still needs to bring under full control before it can lay claim to occupying the entire region. Consider the current dynamics. It will take them approximately a year and a half to do this, and a resource equivalent to today's Russian grouping on the territory of Ukraine. It will be very difficult for them to accomplish this, and it will be far from as fast as they want, Palisa declared, as he also shared the numbers that Russia lost in 2025 just to claim a small portion of the Donbas region. All told, Russia took less than 1% of Ukraine in 2025, at a cost of over 450,000 of its soldiers, Palisa says. Palisa adds that Ukraine currently still holds about 6,000 square kilometers, or about 2,316 square miles of the Donetsk region that Russia still needs to capture. Keep that number in mind. We'll be coming back to it when we look into the maths behind Palisa's claims. For now, what this all adds up to is that Putin would have to dedicate approximately the entire force that Russia has in Ukraine, along with at least 18 months, to take the Donbas. And with each dead Russian soldier, whatever Putin has planned for the rest of Ukraine weakens. As for Zelensky, his projection for Russia taking the Donbas involves an even longer timeline than that of his presidential office's deputy head. Ukraine's president says that the occupation of eastern Ukraine will cost about 800,000 Russian lives and that it will take at least 2 years and progress will be very slow. In my opinion, they will not last that long. Zelensky adds that he knows this because the recent history of Russia in the Donbas region shows that Putin's forces aren't able to take territory quickly enough, and that Russia is sacrificing enormous numbers of soldiers, not to mention equipment and supplies, for every square kilometer of the region that it takes. These are all very interesting claims by Ukraine, and if you stick with us, you'll learn just what it is about the Donbas that makes it such a death trap for Putin's invading forces. But before we get to that, we have to ask the big question: do Ukraine's claims add up? To answer that, we're going to have to dig deeper into the figures. Thankfully, we have some that reveal just how truthful Ukraine's claims about the Donbas really are. We'll start with the amount of territory that Russia is capturing in the region and just what those captures are costing Putin's forces. On February 24th, Metsa reported that the Russian army was suffering such enormous losses in the Donetsk region that Ukraine was shredding through 156 of Russia's soldiers for every square kilometer that Putin's forces managed to occupy. That figure comes from Ukraine's defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov, who says that Ukraine's goal is now to increase these losses to 200 soldiers per square kilometer, which Fedorov says is the last level at which advancing becomes impossible. This is an ambitious target for Ukraine, but for now, let's stick with the 156 figure. We ask you to keep Palisa's claims that Russia still has 6,000 square kilometers of Donetsk to capture before it can claim to hold the Donbas. This is actually a disputed figure. In December, Reuters claimed that the number was 5,000 square kilometers. Though it's worth keeping in mind, this was around the time that Russia was claiming to have occupied territory, such as the city of Pokrovsk, that it didn't actually occupy. Still, that gives us two figures to examine: 5,000 and 6,000 square kilometers left for Russia to take. Starting with Reuters' number, Russia occupying 5,000 square kilometers at this current rate of 156 casualties per square kilometer amounts to a casualty count of 780,000. So even with the lower figure, we see that Zelensky and his office's deputy head are pretty much right on the money. Zelensky said that it would take about 800,000 soldiers for Russia to capture the Donbas. That happens to be even more than the 715,000 soldiers that Russia has deployed into the country, meaning Putin indeed has to expend an entire army to take the Donbas, even in the best-case scenario. As for the worst case, which is that Russia has to take 6,000 square kilometers, we get a total casualty count of 936,000. That's an absurd figure. For Russia, it veers uncomfortably close to the almost 1.27 million casualties that Ukraine's Ministry of Finance claims that Russia has experienced since Putin launched his war 4 years ago. Plus, it's unclear if Metzer's figure of 156 casualties per square kilometer in Donetsk includes Russian soldiers who surrender or go absent without leave. If it doesn't, Russia may be staring down the barrel of 18 months where it would lose close to 1 million of its soldiers just to capture the Donbas. Russia is already at the point where it's suffered the largest losses of any major military power since World War II, as reported by The Independent. What this means for Putin is that a continued push into the Donbas amounts to him digging an even deeper grave for a Russian military that is already 6 feet under and counting. All of this brings us to some questions. Chiefly, why is Putin so adamant about taking the Donbas when he knows what the cost will be? And why is the Donbas such a tough nut for Russia to crack? We'll answer the second of those questions later in the video, so be sure to stick with us until then. As for why Putin seems so relentlessly capable of destroying an entire generation of Russian men to take the Donbas, there are several reasons. The first of which we can trace back to Putin's desire to restore the Russian Federation to something resembling what Putin sees as the glory years of the Soviet Union. Francis Farrell, reporting for the Kyiv Independent, explains this Soviet-era desire. During a brief history lesson where he covers what makes the Donbas so important to Putin, Farrell focuses on how Russia took advantage of the Donbas region being home to vast amounts of coal during the Soviet era. During the Soviet Union's industrialization drive, huge numbers of workers from all over the country, including from the Gulag system, were relocated to work in the Donetsk Oblast's mining and heavy industry sectors, Farrell explains. This gives us two angles to consider for Putin's desire to take the Donbas, which are that Russia is very well aware of just how valuable this portion of Ukraine is, and that due to Russia having sent so many of its people into the Donbas during the Soviet era, Putin still has this warped perception that the Donbas is, and has always been, part of Russia. It's this perception that is one of the reasons why Putin focused on Donetsk and the other major Donbas region of Luhansk during his initial campaign of aggression against Ukraine back in 2014. Putin supported proxy separatist groups in both of these regions during the 2014 campaign, in addition to sending the Little Green Men, who were essentially covert Russian soldiers sent into Ukraine to wreak havoc. Although Moscow consistently denied being involved, its fingerprint was everywhere, Farrell says, adding, from the leaders of the so-called uprising to the way the pro-Russian forces were financed and armed, never mind the countless direct evidence of the presence of regular Russian troops. Russia failed to take the Donbas in 2014. But sure enough, it became the focal point of the country's full-scale invasion in 2022. Russia attacked in the Donbas in large part because Putin claimed from the outset that the so-called Russian people who lived in the region wanted to be liberated by the Russian Federation. After the complete failure of the initial special military operation, Russia switched its entire focus to the main goal of liberating the Donbas by April 2022. Of course, Putin's claims were nonsense. This was highlighted by Good Authority, which reported on a survey of 4,025 residents of the Donbas, divided equally between those with Ukrainian and Russian origins. That survey found that 42% of those questioned wanted to remain part of Ukraine, versus 31% who were happy to be annexed by Russia. Another 9% said they wanted complete independence, with the rest of the respondents saying that they didn't know what they wanted. These figures do show that there is a high amount of Russian influence in the Donbas. However, many of those living in the region prefer being part of Ukraine to any other option, which immediately rubbishes Putin's claims about whatever supposed liberation he delivers being something that those in the Donbas desire. But then that's never really been what all of this is about, has it, Putin? Money lies at the root of why Putin wants the Donbas. But before we go deeper into that, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. For all of Putin's bluster about history and liberation, it's cold, hard cash that drives his desire to snatch the Donbas away from Ukraine. Specifically, Ukraine's mineral resources, which include the coal that we mentioned earlier, along with dozens of rare earth minerals and other resources from which Russia could profit, are in Putin's sights. According to United 24 Media, these mineral deposits are valued at around $15 trillion, and you can probably guess where most of these deposits are. As United 24 Media points out, the primary regions containing these mineral deposits align with areas targeted or already occupied by Russian forces, including Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia regions. The Economic Times adds to this, noting that the Donbas region is among the richest in Ukraine. It claims that this single region is home to 56% of Ukraine's entire hard coal reserves, which are among the largest in the world and valued at $12 trillion on their own. It's unclear if that means $12 trillion of hard coal in the Donbas alone, or about half that amount. But either way, there's a lot of money for Russia to make from its push into the Donbas. The same resource adds that the territory that Russia already occupies in Ukraine as of August 2025 means that Russia controls about $12.5 trillion of Ukraine's mineral and gas assets. Add agriculture and water resources into the mix, which aid in farming throughout South Ukraine and help to keep Crimea supplied with water amid that region's constant shortages, and you start to see what it's really all about for Putin. He'll claim history and liberation. What he means is that it's about filling the Russian coffers, which is more important now, after a war that has cost Russia over $1 trillion and counting, than it ever has been before. Putin's problem brings us back to the second question that we posed a few minutes back. Why is the Donbas going to be such a tough nut for Putin to crack? Ukraine's stellar defense of the region, which is what has led to the enormous casualty figures that we now see, is part of the reason. However, another of Putin's major problems, and perhaps the reason why the last thing that he wants to do is to actually try to take the Donbas, is that the worst is yet to come for Russia in that region. Now that Russia finally seems to have taken Pokrovsk, its forces have to switch their focus to the fortress belt, along with the other dense urban areas that still remain under Ukraine's control. Among those urban areas are Liman and Dobropilya, which have the potential to turn into death traps on the same scale as Pokrovsk. But far more worrying for Putin is the line of large cities that run along the H20 Konstantinivka-Slovyansk highway. Spanning about 31 miles, this line of cities includes Kramatorsk and Slovyansk to the north, along with Alexeyevo-Druzhkivka, and Konstantinivka to the south. Combined, this collection of cities had a pre-war population of over 380,000, which is about 6.3 times more than the pre-war population of Pokrovsk, against which Putin almost destroyed his entire eastern force over the last 2 years. A point here is simple. Russia has a very long way to go before it can topple these cities and take the Donbas. And as if things couldn't get any worse for Putin and his greedy ambitions, there is a reason why this stretch of settlements is known as the Fortress Belt. As Russia's forces have spent over 4 years mired down in other regions of Donetsk, Ukraine has been building the Fortress Belt up into a networked defensive mechanism that will deliver death to Russia's forces at a scale that we've yet to see during the war. The Economist highlighted this in a January article where it claimed that Ukraine now has the type of fortress belt that it wished it had back in 2022, and it's all due to Russia taking so long to advance. There are now lines of defenses stretching up to 200 meters or over 650 feet on the crest of the hill near the cities of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk alone, the outlet says. This single line is filled with barbed and razor wire, anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth, and excavated soil that serves as a defensive berm. There will also be drones on constant patrol, ready to destroy any Russian units that attempt to cross. And this is just a small part of a massive line of defenses that spans the 31-mile length of the fortress belt, all of which Russia has to overcome before it even manages to get to the settlements themselves. Farrell adds that Ukraine has built massive kill zones between and behind these cities, meaning that there is simply no easy way for Russia to push through the fortress belt. Just like the line of defenses discussed by The Economist, these kill zones are filled with defenses against Russian infantry and mechanized units, along with the ever-present and buzzing drones that exist to spot Russian forces and destroy them. Putin knows that he can't expend an entire Ukraine's worth of the Russian army over the next 18 months to 2 years just to take this belt. That sheer scale of death would be too massive even for him. The reality that Russia's leader is trying to hide is that he's terrified of what awaits his army in Donetsk, which is why he's now trying so hard to create a narrative about how Ukraine's fall and the loss of the Donbas are inevitable. Putin needs that narrative to hold up. The longer it does, the more time he has to try to manipulate the West into believing the garbage that comes out of his mouth, which in turn gives him leverage for peace talks. Putin will push for Ukraine to cede the Donbas because, as the Atlantic Council puts it, the Donetsk fortress belt is a major problem for Russia. As long as Kyiv continues to control the Donbas fortress belt, there is a good chance that the Ukrainian military can turn the entire region into a graveyard for Putin's invading army, the think tank says. Bloomberg adds that Russia is currently weighing up its peace talk options as Ukraine continues to refuse to cede the Donbas. The outlet claims that Russia has already created a draft memorandum for a peace accord that it will sign if Ukraine agrees to withdraw its forces from the region. This isn't a power play by Putin, it's Russian fear put on paper. And Ukraine knows it. On March 3rd, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that Zelensky has no intention of abandoning the Donbas or the 200,000 people who still live in the region. I want to be clear, I will never abandon Donbas and the 200,000 Ukrainians who live there. Why should I? Because Putin makes it a condition for peace, and he will immediately put forward new demands after that. No, I will not tolerate that. Zelensky roared in a statement that is the last thing that Putin wanted to hear. Ukraine can see through Putin's Donbas game. It knows that Putin is terrified of the prospect of sacrificing another 800,000 soldiers at least to the fortress belt, along with up to 2 more years of fighting. Those 2 years alone are hardly something that the 73-year-old Putin can spare if he wants the taking of the Donbas to be the legacy that he leaves behind. Ukraine also realizes that ceding the Donbas now just opens up the door for Russia to attack again in the future. In fact, Russian plans obtained by Ukraine already reveal that Putin has his eyes on much more than the one region he claims will bring peace to Ukraine if Zelensky cedes it. These plans, which detail Russia's strategy in 2027, reveal that Putin's forces intend to push deeper into Zaporizhia, attack Dnipro city, and perhaps even overrun Odessa. In other words, they're not the kinds of plans that Russia would be making if the Donbas were all that it wanted. Russia is preparing for a long-term campaign in the Donbas not because it wants to fight that fight, because Ukraine is giving it no choice. There will be no ceding of territory. If Putin wants the Donbas, he's going to have to commit to losing up to 2 more years and the sacrifice of all the soldiers that Russia has in Ukraine, and maybe many more, to get it. Does Putin have the appetite for that battle? If he has learned any lessons from the horror show that Russia endured in Pokrovsk, he shouldn't. Pokrovsk was a microcosm of what awaits Russia's forces in the fortress belt, and the city will go down in Ukrainian and Russian legend as one of the most bloodthirsty in all of the war. Pokrovsk curse has already torn through Russia's army, and you can find out all about it if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit subscribe to see more analysis of the brutal failings of the Russian military. And thanks for watching.